Tony and I have the A9 today, and we're taking pictures of some figure skaters and some hockey players. We have it in a real world scenario to see if all of those specs actually translate into the real world.
Can it take on the Canon 1DX and the Nikon D5?
We'll see.
You know, a lot of people are going to say, what do you need 20 frames a second for? And that is really fast, but with action, it allows you to pick a more perfect moment. If you take 100 shots, there's going to be one split second that is the very best one. And if you're shooting at 10 frames a second, you probably won't capture that precise moment. You'll get something close, and it'll be almost as good. But if you're trying to get the ultimate shot, especially with action, the moment that puck hits the stick, your odds are much better the higher the frame rate.
By the way, you'll only hit 20 frames per second when you're not focusing. Just like the Canon 1DX Mark II and the Nikon D5, it slows down when it needs to track motion between frames. Still, even when tracking intense action, the Alpha 9 captured 10 to 15 frames per second, typically more than the big bodies from Canon and Nikon in the same scenarios.
Man, that high frame rate comes in handy when she's swirling like that. You can't even chimp with this many pictures. I'd just be looking through 100 pictures of them twirling, but I know I got the shot there somewhere. Already, one thing I'm getting used to is I don't have to really worry about my buffer filling up, and I have an extremely high frame rate, so if I just hold down the shutter, I'm going to catch some action, specifically the puck hitting the goalie. So I'm used to letting off of my shutter button so that my camera doesn't buffer, and with this, you have so much time before you're buffering, you can just hold down that shutter and be sure that you get a shot.
It does have a big buffer, but I'm still finding that if I try to access the menus while it's buffering, then I can't get into them. But also, I have managed to fill up the buffer because it takes a long time for the buffer to clear. So even though it can hold 200 shots, it's taking like long enough that while I continue to shoot after taking a break, it's still writing to the card, and therefore it's still buffering. So some of the same issues that we saw on earlier Sony cameras.
I filled up my buffer. How does she spin like that?
On the A9, shooting uncompressed RAW, I did get about 220 shots before it started buffering. Even when writing to 2 memory cards, it didn't seem to matter if I wrote to 1 or 2. If you shoot uncompressed RAW, then it drops to about 113 frames before it starts buffering, so still really pretty good. But they have it supports a new type of SD card, but I still kind of wish that they supported the XQD cards like the D5 and the D500 do, because those just unload faster, and I did run into times when I was still like waiting for the buffer to unload before I could start shooting again, and it's a little bit annoying. Not a deal breaker, you can work around it. Okay, so it'll buffer 200 compressed RAW shots, which is good, but it takes a full 2 minutes to write those 200 shots to the SD card, and we have the fastest SD cards provided by Sony that they make.
But wait, it gets worse. Only one slot supports UHS 2. If you're writing backup copies of pictures to both cards simultaneously, the buffer could take 3 or more minutes to clear.
And while you do that, you can review pictures, but it's real slow to review the pictures.
The electronic viewfinder does make chimping less important than on a DSLR because you see the exposure and the histogram when you capture it. Still, chimping is easier on the 1DX and D5.
I'm a hybrid shooter, so I'll shoot some stills and then I'll shoot video. And again, the buffering's coming up as a problem because when I switch to video mode, it won't start recording until the buffer completely clears, which again can take 2 minutes if you filled up the buffer. I'm shooting, there's just no sound.
Imagine a future where pros shoot with silent shutters. No cameras clicking over press conference audio, no wedding photographers disturbing quiet ceremonies. The Alpha 9 makes this possible, and our testing showed none of the traditional penalties of an electronic shutter. For portraits, you can turn on a shutter sound to let your model know you've taken a picture.
This is actually our pre-coffee morning ritual.
Like most mirrorless cameras, the A9 has both a silent electronic shutter and a mechanical shutter. However, this is the first camera that's designed to use the electronic shutter primarily. Sony has overcome almost every weakness of the electronic shutter, but you'll have to enable the mechanical shutter to take pictures at longer than 1/8 of a second. With previous cameras, electronic shutters could cause banding with different frequencies of light. We shot under a variety of different lighting conditions, and we never saw banding, but the Sony rep said there were some extreme frequencies that might cause issues. Switching to the mechanical shutter is easy, but it drops you to 5 frames per second.
I was curious what it was like to use the no blackout feature, and I like it a lot, especially for action shots, because you never lose track of your subject. If you have an especially fast subject, like a diving bird, for example, if you shoot wildlife, it's easy to lose it in the frame. So I'm a fan. How about you?
Yeah, now a DSLR constantly flashing the mirror in front of your eye seems primitive. While you're shooting, the viewfinder looks like you're just watching a video with no breaks in it. I don't know how I can ever go back to a DSLR. The face and eye detector are actually working really well. They're pirouetting, and every time they start to turn towards me, it will pick up the faces, and then when their eyes are actually visible, it will draw a box on the eye and focus right on it. It's pretty remarkable.
The A9's eye detection AF is far better than any camera we've ever used, including the A6500, the A7R II, and the Fuji X-T2. While it did fail in heavily backlit conditions, it's good enough that portrait and wedding photographers will rarely have to touch the thumbstick. We reassigned the Sony A9's AE button for eye detection focusing, making it easier to activate than other Sonys. This feature alone is enough to make us shoot Sony for portraits and weddings.
So I started off using the lock-on autofocus with the expand flexible spot, but with a lot of people in the picture, it was kind of hunting too much for my taste. So instead I switched it to the expand flexible spot. It gave me a little more control. I really like using the joystick, and I'm nailing a lot of the shots. A lot of the shots are in focus. So.
Many cameras have had electronic shutters, but they come with big penalties, including rolling shutter that makes vertical lines look tilted.
Perfect, thank you. Just did a rolling shutter test, had him strike the puck as fast as he could, and I see maybe the slightest hint of a bend to his stick, but maybe there actually is a natural bend there. But either way, I don't think it's a problem. We've been shooting hockey here all day, and I haven't seen any sort of unnatural rolling shutter, which you definitely would see using silent shutter on an A7R II. I couldn't even shoot soccer with silent shutter on that. I actually think I like the 3D tracking on the D500 and D5 a little bit better than the way it works in the Sony, though it works really well in the Sony. But I feel like an ass because the shutter is so loud. I feel like I'm disturbing everybody here with their silent cameras. And the blinking in the viewfinder, now, even though I was used to that, now I hate it.
When you factor in the higher frame rate and the lack of viewfinder blackout, DSLRs feel ancient.
There we go. I've got the D500 with the 70-200 here, and the Sony keeps up with it. I'm surprised. It has a higher frame rate, so I think it's a good option for sports photography at this point.
Ergonomically, I'm still a fan of the D500. It has a lot of nice touches. The buttons are just bigger, and the AF on button seems to fall in the right place for me, and it's easier for me to get over to the thumbstick here. Also, having buttons along the left side here just means I can navigate stuff a little bit quicker. It's not a deal breaker, but ergonomically, I guess I still like the big fat DSLR.
So like as I'm holding it, I literally am like feeling pressure. So after about a half hour or something, like
I was just gonna, because your fingers are wider.
It fit our hands fine, but if your hands are as big as Max's, you're going to want to add a bigger grip. Why didn't Sony make the body bigger if pros have to balance huge telephotos? I suspect they're planning to use the same body for a high megapixel Sony A9R and a video-focused Sony A9S. Unlike the main competition, the 1DX Mark II and the Nikon D5, using the rear screen does not slow down your focusing. The A9's tilting screen can make it much easier to get low or high angles too.
Everybody has been asking about the weatherproofing on it. Hasn't broken yet, huh?
Me either.
Okay, that test doesn't prove anything, and weatherproofing is basically impossible to scientifically test. It's definitely the most durable E-mount camera, but our Sony rep honestly told us that it wouldn't stand up to the same harsh conditions as a 1DX or a D5.
Blood!
If you have a job where you're required to keep shooting in a downpour, we'd still recommend a big DSLR.
We're at the Armory in New York City shooting track and field. They have set up an incredible set of events for us. Let's see how it does.
Here, we really proved the A9's focus tracking is at least as good as the 1DX Mark II, the D5, and the D500, and those cameras are the best in the world. They each miss focus so rarely that it's impossible to pick a winner. This is amazing. It's a breakthrough for mirrorless cameras. Note that while it does have a touchscreen, it's really limited. You can't use it to change focusing points while you have your eye to the viewfinder. You can't use it to navigate menus or type on a keyboard, but you can use it to set a focusing point or zoom in and while you're reviewing pictures. Sony said the electronic shutter's flash sync speed was limited to 1/160th, and the mechanical shutter sync speed is 1/250th. That's okay. We don't mind using the mechanical shutter and limiting ourselves to 5 frames per second in the studio. Note that our pre-release A9 refused to fire a flash at all with the electronic shutter, so we couldn't test that. I assume that's a bug that will be fixed in the final version. Over the course of 5 hours of shooting, Chelsea shot 4,500 frames and I shot 6,500 frames, all using one battery. The dual card slots protected us from SD card failure, finally making us confident enough to shoot professionally with a Sony. Thanks for listening, guys.
Lock-on AF is supposed to pick a particular subject and continue to track it even if it moves around the frame. What happened was I was shooting 4 runners and I locked on one runner, but the camera kept switching focus to one of the other runners, even as when they were still, as they were running, so it didn't successfully do that. Not a big deal. It means you have to use the thumbstick and manually select the focusing point instead, but the 3D tracking in the Nikons is pretty much dead on every time.
Shifting from one object to another.
Before angry commenters call me a Nikon fanboy and tell me to read the manual, I worked with 2 Sony techs to troubleshoot the problem on site. We can still hope for a future firmware update though.
Like 2 days ago, I loved the A7R II, and now I just switched to it, and I despise it now. It seems terrible because the A9 is so much better. First of all, for shooting sports, this thing is slow, and the viewfinder lag when you're shooting, you're seeing the last shot you took, so it's like impossible to keep something in the frame. This was never a sports camera for me, but the A9 is definitely way beyond it if you're thinking about upgrading. I also say little bits like having the shutter selector on the left side over here, the thumbstick, the bigger buttons made a big difference, and just now I had to turn off silent mode on this camera and I had to dig through the menus to do it. So even just that they added the My menu to the A9 made a big difference, just in like real world needing to quickly change the setting.
The Alpha 9 is better in every way than the Alpha 7R II, addressing all of our usability, battery life, memory card, and focusing complaints. But the Alpha 7R II still has better image quality. Of course, the A7R II's 42 megapixels extract noticeably more detail from sharp lenses when you have perfect technique, but the A7R II also has more dynamic range for recovering shadows, and at high ISOs the A7R II shows less noise when scaled to the same resolution. Designing a sensor for speed like the A9 compromises image quality a bit. But the A9's image quality is good enough for professional use in almost all conditions. The file sizes are smaller, so they process quicker. And for us, unless we're shooting landscapes, we'd always pick up the A9 over the A7R II.
I was worried how it would focus with a long telephoto like this 100 to 400, but even at 400, it seems to be tracking 100% exactly like I'd expect out of a D5 or a 1DX. I'm happy with that, but the balance isn't great. Like the grip is bigger than it is on the A7s, but it's still not really big enough, and even carrying it around is just a little more tiring to hold. The vertical grip would definitely help, but I wish the whole camera were bulkier. Thanks for filming everything with us. What did you think of the A9 as a video camera?
What's most interesting to me is it's a full frame camera with full sensor readout in Super 35 and full frame. And I love that because on the R2, it's so nice to just reframe your shot quickly. You know, I now have 2 focal lengths with every one of my lenses.
Yeah,
I've
so
got
you
a
can
1.5 crop
full
and a
frame
full
or
frame.
1.5,
Just
yeah.
jump back and forth. But there was a quality penalty on the R2 when you were shooting in that full frame mode. Looking at the stuff we've done today, it's sharp, noise levels are the same using both of those modes. And the viewfinder saw a big upgrade. It is much sharper than it was before, I think twice as many pixels roughly. Mm-hmm. So I didn't find I was constantly like punching in focus to check.
Yeah,
sure
it's sharper, so you are more confident that you've nailed focus than you would be on a poor
And
viewfinder.
it's important because when you look at this with the punch-in focus, it's still very soft when you do that, which has always been one of my issues with the A7 series cameras. It's no different on this.
How many times did it overheat for you?
It did not overheat.
Yay.
No, we didn't do a stress test or anything like that with it, but yeah, I didn't see the little warning pop up or anything like that. And I hope a lot of that's due to the new battery, which is also awesome. getting, we got over 2 hours of shoot time on a single battery, where I would have been
That's crazy.
close to 3 batteries on an A7 series camera.
Yeah.
Along with the dual cards, another huge upgrade on
Right,
it.
so you can write to both cards. If a card fails, you haven't lost your whole day
Yeah,
of
if it's
shooting.
a professional shoot, if like I'm shooting for Tony and Chelsea, I don't want to screw that stuff up.
How was rolling shutter?
I was a little surprised to see as much of it as I did. It's certainly better than what we were seeing on the 63, 6500s.
S-Log. S-Log, which allows you to capture more dynamic range if you are the type who grades your video. Not there.
And it's not there, along with all the rest of their broadcast picture profiles, which I think is insanely short-sighted. If you were, say, working for a news agency or something like that, they're probably going to have broadcast cameras running at the same time. With picture profiles, I can match it to any other Sony broadcast camera with the push of one button. But the lack of log is a huge deal. Like you can see in my footage all day, and I was trying to avoid it, but we shot a lot of contrasty scenes, and there are clipped highlights and blocked up shadows in a lot of the footage that we use today. Testing the continuous autofocus, I did find it had a little, it kind of did that wobble that I see a lot on the 63. So it's in line with the other cameras. It's not dramatically better than what we've seen on them.
They're not a D810 killer, they're not a 5DSR killer, they're not even an A7R II killer. Those cameras have their own place. This is to take on the big boys, and in so many ways it kind of blows them away. Like the silent shutter for me is a huge thing.
I like the silent shutter for wildlife. You guys had brought up events photography. You don't want to disrupt a tender moment in a wedding with a bunch of shutter sounds.
Yeah, I don't know why Sony's not pitching it for events and weddings, because I think
they
it's
should. It'd
the
be
best
great
camera for those things.
yeah.
Those guys don't want to deal with huge files. 24 megapixels is fine. Sony has good G Master lenses for those purposes now. You can keep it completely quiet. The autofocus was perfect. The eye detect autofocus worked great and would allow you to set up and just get the shot much faster than you could with any other camera.
I was amazed by how many shots I had in focus.
Yeah, it seems like all of them. Like it just seems to grab focus as good as those two cameras, which is amazing because those are the best focusing cameras in the world. I think I would generally rather have this than a 1DX or D5. I like the smaller form factor. I mean, I wish it were a little bigger actually, but I think
deeper grip.
the 1DX and D5 are uncomfortably big. We also need to see some big glass if people are going to be shooting sports for it, but it seems like it's ready for close-up sports where you can shoot with a 70-200, as well as portraits, events, and weddings. I think it's great for those things.
And we did use the 100-400 today, and that seems super sharp.
Yeah, if you're happy with 100-400 at f5.6, if that's good enough for the sports that you shoot, that was a fantastic option. And really, the other advantages of this camera make up for so many things that are kind of weak. So fantastic job, Sony. Questions about the cameras, ask a comment down below. Give us a like, subscribe, check out Chris and Jordan at the Camera Store TV, and check out our book, Stunning Digital Photography, the #1 photography book in the world, as well as our books on Lightroom and Photoshop, because you gotta do some post-processing, right? It's gonna make you faster, and that means you can get more work done when you get good at post. Thanks, guys, bye.
Thanks.